Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 Hooper, current high school coach, teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids, and Omari Sankofa II, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press. Omari, my guy, my 7-year-old scored his first soccer goal this week and then proceeded to do the Steph Curry celebration. 1, should I be okay with that? And 2, does Cade have a signature celebration yet that I can teach him instead?
1, you should be okay with that because Steph Curry is like Michael Jordan to these kids. Like you go to the playground, you see kids launching up threes from like 30 feet and whatnot. Like I feel like that's super on brand for a kid these days. And for the signature celebration, he does have the kind of head down, yet on the floor thing he does whenever he hits a big shot. And this isn't really a celebration, but another thing I noticed this season that I just think is a little funny. Whenever you see Cade turn the ball over or he misses a shot he needs to hit or whatnot, he does he'll do the clap, right?
Yes,
he'll look down and he'll do a single clap. And it's just like a really firm, like frustration clap. So maybe your kid can incorporate that as well.
You know what's funny about that? When I do my film breakdowns on Cade, I always look for that. Like if I'm not sure whether the defensive breakdown was his fault or the pass or whatever, I always look for it. And if Cade claps, I know it was Cade's fault and not a teammate's fault. So
it's the frustration clap every single time. I always look for it.
Yep. So I'm gonna have to teach the little man that before I teach him anything else. So
no doubt, I think it's a very productive way to express anger. It's just one clap and you're done. You're not fuss out the rest or anything. Just get it out of your system.
Yes.
Please follow us on Twitter at Motor City Hoops, at Omari Sankofa, and at Freep Sports. Make sure you subscribe to Freep.com, and also make sure you subscribe, rate, comment, and interact with us because we always love the interaction and hearing the feedback from you all. Today we have a very special guest, my man Jeremy Woo. He's been a longtime draft guru for Sports Illustrated. And, of course, the Pistons have the third best overall odds and are tied for the best odds for the number 1 pick. Jeremy, how's it going, man?
What's up, guys? We got like 2 months to go until the draft, but it's starting to get more, easier to talk about these things with some level of, actual accuracy. And also, it just feels more real, I think, now to be able to have these conversations. So it's just, I'm preparing myself for, a lot of chaos.
For sure. And it helps. I mean, we're past March Madness, and then also you kind of know what the lottery order could look like, so you could at least look at it more from the standpoint of what these guys fit, but these teams could need.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's going to be, I guess the lottery is always interesting, but I think this year, I think it also just looking at the way this is shaping up, and I actually think it's a fairly good, like top, 10 or 12 guys. I think, it's going to be pretty fascinating to kind of see, how it shakes out. And then, particularly because we have so many guys, top guys are all kind of similar positionally. So, the way that falls is going to be kind of interesting to see it play out, I think.
No doubt. So you look at the top 5, and you mentioned they're all pretty similar positionally. I know there's one guy at the top that you think should be the number 1 pick. Who is that? And for you, why is this sort of a no-brainer for you?
Yeah, I've had Jabari Smith number 1 all season pretty much. I moved him to number 1 in December after I saw him play in person for the first time. I had not seen him play in high school before that, so I didn't have as good of a feel for him. But he came on really strong, and I think, for me, it's not that close with him and the other guys at the top. Just he's younger than all of them. He shoots it better than all of them. He's good defensively. He's going to be able to score right away. Like his strength being the jumper, which, I think as soon as you see it like in person for the first time, you're like, oh God, like guys that tall aren't supposed to shoot like that. And it's, I've been doing this for a while, and I have not seen, a 6'10" guy to shoot it like as comfortably as him. And particularly, considering the age and, all the relative context. I just think he is the guy who I would be most afraid to pass on.
Yeah, so I actually just did a bunch of film breakdown of him, just watching whatever I could get my hands on, and I found myself just constantly going, oh my gosh. Oh my, like whenever he would hit some of those shots, like turn around, pull up in transition, he came off a screen a couple of times, mid-post fadeaways, like I feel like he has the full bag of whatever jump shot you want. And I want to get to the creation, like the ball handling, because I know that's the big knock, but the shooting really is kind of unreal for his size and seeing it at that level.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think he just has more like just moments like, I watch Auburn a lot. I was down there to the story on him. So I was spent some time with him, and I got to know his family a little bit. And I was down there for a whole week in Atlanta, and just he has a handful of moments every game where you're just like, oh god, like just jaw dropping random things that just sort of in the flow of the game. And nobody else, to me, did as much of that, which tends to be kind of indicative, I think, and at least of something to me. And so, yeah, I mean, you can kind of, to me, obviously you can kind of criticize the stuff that he doesn't do well, but I just think he's so good at so many things that I'd rather take that guy and kind of like, stack skills onto it rather than, and again, even if he, and we can get deeper into this, but like, shooting is such a premium skill, and he is way, way, way ahead of the curve for someone that age and that size. And I don't think any of the other guys will ever shoot it as well as he does now. So, just for me, that's a really, really massive factor.
Bryce touched on it, but how much does the shot creation and lack of ball handling worry you?
So I've been thinking about this, and like, here's what bothers me a little bit about this conversation. We talk about shot creation, or at least I don't agree with. I think there's probably some like conflation right now that like shot creation means I have to do 5 dribble moves and then shoot. Like, to me, that's not what shot creation is. To me, shot creation is just like, can I get a good shot and how quickly can I get it for myself or for my teammates? And again, being that he is that tall, and like we talked about, he can get a shot off a lot of different ways already. I know he's not going to be like the odds are he will not be a guy who's going to have to take guys off the dribble. But I mean, I think there's value in just being able to keep it simple. Like, even if he plays off 2-3 dribbles a lot of the time, that should be enough to like get his shot off. And I guess the bigger issue would be getting to the rim, but I think some of that will open up for him as he gets stronger. And people are going to have to close out really hard on him. So there's going to be space for him to get downhill. And I actually think he can pass pretty well. Like, as he gets more confident in terms of like ball security, it'll be easier for him to make the passes like on the move. Like, but you can see it on the standstill. He has feel. He understands how to play with teammates.
No, I was just going to say, I think I have to be careful about saying shot creation, because the more I've watched, like you say, he can create a shot. He can get a look from about anywhere. It's just going to be a jump shot. So I think that's, as I watched more, I was like, man, I just like to see him be able to attack the closeouts, get to the rim a little bit more. And maybe I was just being nitpicky. Let's use that to transition to another guy, a guy I'm really high on. I don't know if Amari is quite as high on him as I am, but that's Paolo Banchero, another guy in this mix. I don't know if you have him 2, 3, 4, where you have him. I really liked his ability. I know he doesn't shoot it as well, but I liked his ability off the dribble. He can run some, pick and roll as the ball handler. Where are you on Paolo? Where do you think he transitions into the NBA? And I know there's a lot of defensive concerns as well.
Yeah, he was my number 1 prospect coming into the year. The fact that he moved down isn't necessarily like a huge knock on him. It was just, watching this whole thing play out. I think he, for me, he goes, I still kind of am deciding how I feel about like the 2, 3, 4 or whatever. But, he's been like 2 or 3 for me most of the time. And I think he definitely helped himself more than some of the other guys did in the tournament, just because obviously Duke went pretty far. I was at the ACC tournament and I was watching him there, and his jumper was, really not in a good place. And then a week later, he's, got it back and making more shots. And I don't know if that's ever going to be like the strength of his game. But anyway, like with him, I think it's just his ability to kind of play out of different spots on the floor. Obviously he can handle it. He's a really good passer. He's smart. And he plays team basketball. Like his scoring is his big thing, but I don't view him as like a selfish, like pig type of scorer. Like he, understands how to use his own, draw attention and find guys. Right. So I think, with him, I actually do think he can fit in a lot of places just because of those things. Like, those are pretty malleable qualities, but he's going to have to make shots in order to really like be able to space the floor. Because right now, you watch Duke, and there were a lot of moments where, at the end of the game, like Mark Williams had to come out because they needed to make sure Paolo had space on the inside. He's going to have to be able to stretch it a little bit to just make the most of what he can do. And defensively, like, I don't think it's like a disaster. But he's not super, super athletic or explosive. He's not a rim protector. And there are times where you'd like to see him be more physical and put in more effort on that end. So some of that's a matter of like how he sees himself, and some of it's, under his control. So, but the fit with him is going to be important in terms of, sort of maximizing his ability to play in space, and then probably putting him with a stretch five ideally.
My favorite guy in the draft, and I feel like as the weeks pass, this is becoming more of an unpopular take. I really like Chet, and my logic for basically Chet is in a draft where a lot of people will say none of these guys maybe have the clear superstar ceiling of like a Cade Cunningham or a Jalen Green. Just his versatility on defense and just what he brings there is extremely hard to find, and those guys tend to get paid just because it's really hard to find rim protectors. Where are you on Chet, and how much does his lack of weight impact his ceiling on that end of the floor for you?
Yeah, it's such a hard conversation to have just because like I think some people are like so like hardcore about Chet that they don't want to listen to the counter arguments, and some people are like so anti-Chet that you can't really like. It's hard to sometimes meet in the middle. So I've been trying to figure out like how I feel, and I think like I'll put it this way: like coming into the year, I actually had a lot more questions about him than I do now. Like I kind of understand. I feel like I have an understanding for what he's going to be. I think that it's kind of ironic though in some ways because he was kind of billed in high school as like, oh, he's a 7-foot guard, and like I was at the Steph Curry camp when he crossed Steph Curry over. That was the first time I ever saw him play, but that was like one play. Like doesn't matter at all. So like but he was billed as one thing, but now you see him at Gonzaga, and he is clearly a good defensive prospect. It feels to me like he's going to be a big. Like I don't think he has functionality as a wing. Like his foot speed is not good enough to really blow by guys. It's like it's nice that he can bring the ball up in transition. When he's in the open court and has a little space, like he's smart and he's got some skill and he can do that stuff, which is all great. But I think we are talking about a guy who probably profiles more. I think you probably want to play him as more of like a 4. And not like this has been sort of the debate all season, like around the NBA. Like I heard early in the year, people were like, well, can he play the 3? Like people are trying to think about how you can kind of like insulate, the weaknesses, right? And so for him, like fit is going to be really important. I think there's still some fear that, defensively, it's not all going to translate great to the same degree, which I think is pretty fair to say, just because, playing, also we're talking about, who Gonzaga is playing against, and it's not a great league they play in. And again, like I've had to clarify this a billion times. It's not about like the ranking of the teams they're playing. It's just about like how good are the bigs that you're facing and how athletic are they, and like how close is that to what you're going to see in the NBA? And I think there was a trend in the games where they did play better teams where he kind of like went away offensively a bit, and people hit him, and he couldn't really. I think that sort of showed offensively maybe how much can we expect him to do next year when in those situations he's not able to kind of like take over, right? And that's okay, but that's just not what he is. And I think you just have to kind of like set your expectations correctly. Like, is there some upside? Yeah, like 'cause I think he's going to be able to shoot. He can handle. He's more fluid than a lot of guys that size. He is going to have to get stronger, and you're going to have to kind of like creatively put him in situations to get him to spots where he can leverage the advantage that he does have, which is the length and his touch and his skill, right? But it's not going to be we're not, like I would not say we're going to throw the ball to Chet in the post probably ever. All right, so it's just which is okay. But again, it's all about like with the conversation with him. It's like what are we expecting? And for me, it's like that is an interesting player, but it's not what I would take at number 1.
So you've used the term fit for all of these guys, especially Paolo and Chet. So I want to ask this just for the Pistons and maybe take away the fact that you have JSJ higher than the other two. Let's just talk fit. And I know the Pistons shouldn't worry about it entirely, but they have Cade Cunningham, Sadiq Bey, Isaiah Stewart, whoever you want to factor into this. Which one of those guys fits? I think if you're going to talk fit, specifically Cade, and I know a lot of guys fit next to Cade, but is there one you're like, man, that would be a really nice pairing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's Jabari. And again, I think he's just better than the other guys. And I think he fits everywhere because no one doesn't need a giant shooter. But like, I think he makes a lot of sense because, I mean, if you're just talking about those 3 guys, I mean, Paolo could fit, but he also is a guy who needs the ball in his hands a little bit more to be maximized, right? And again, you could do interesting stuff with them together. But I think having, and also for Jabari, putting him with a guy who's as smart as Cade, who knows how to get you in your spots, like, I mean, Jabari would probably get, open jumpers a lot. Like he's going to get a lot of easy looks. So again, I think one of the nice things about having Cade, and part of why he is such a good prospect is just that he could kind of play with anybody and figure it out. Like that's just kind of what he has always done. Obviously I watched him a lot in high school, and I was pretty early on the Cade train in 2019. he's going to make whoever it is better. So it's just a matter of like, for the Pistons, like what direction do you want to go? But I do think Jabari would be a good fit also just from the perspective of adding him. It definitely makes you more athletic. It makes you, like a longer team, probably a little bit more versatile defensively. And again, I don't know who they're married to, apart from, Cade on the roster. You can kind of just pencil that. If you take Cade and you end up with Jabari, those are two guys you can come up with a billion combinations of other three players you could play with those guys, which I think is a pretty strong foundation, right?
And then the guy is commonly slotted into that fourth spot, and I think he may be a little bit more polarizing than the guys in the top three. But Jaden Ivey, what did he do at Purdue that stood out to you, and how do you think he fits into the league, just given that, top tier athlete, but still kind of rounded out some other parts of his game?
Yeah. So, he's tough for me just because I've seen him play really, really badly this year. And I've also seen him play amazing. Like I was at the game when they played Texas in the NCAA tournament. I saw Purdue play like 6 or 7 times. And he was just so good in that game. And like, if you just showed me that game and I didn't know who it was, you might think, hey, that's the number 1 pick. Like that's how talented he is. I don't necessarily think he'll be the number 1 pick, but I do think, he's going to be in play at 2, 3, 4, whatever. Like teams are going to have those conversations, particularly if you do need a guard. Jaden he's so fast. Physically, he's so just like kind of checks all the boxes. And, at Purdue, he's playing with a big kind of the way that they play through the post a lot. There's usually a big on his side of the floor. So it's harder for him to get into the paint. And he kind of, sort of made the most of that. Sometimes he didn't. But I think the upside is just very much there with him. I would say, I don't think he's a true point guard at this point. Like I think it's more likely he's like if he, hits a really, really high level outcome, he's probably like a, Donovan Mitchell type of like combo guard scorer, kind of can take over the game sometimes, can be, a top scoring option or number 2 option on a really good team. Right. So the talent is absolutely there for him to do it. And I don't doubt that. But there's a lot of stuff he's going to have to add. And he's going to have to be a lot more consistent.
Real quick question here, Jeremy, staying on Jaden Ivey, because I noticed it, and I try not to judge this stuff too much watching through the TV, but I've heard other podcasts talk about it. And with you seeing him in person, that's really cool. Like there's such an advantage to seeing these guys in person. Did you see any body language stuff with Jaden Ivey when you watch him? Because I've just heard people talk about it coming out of that St. Peter's game, that they're like, he needs to answer for this. There was some really bad body. Like, did you get any of that type of stuff whenever you saw him in person?
Yeah. Yes. I've been talking about this most of the season and writing about this. It's like he does. There are games where he looked kind of checked out, and there were games where, again, I'm not in the locker room, so I don't want to say like too much and like read into it because one day can be different than any other day, but like. There were times where it just seemed like he was kind of doing his own thing, wasn't like fully plugged in. And again, it's not to take away from the season that they had. He had a really good year. And again, the other thing in the NCAA tournament when I was there, it was really nice to see. The first 2 games, none of that was there. I mean, he was bought in. He was doing the right stuff. He looks like he was having fun, and he was patient, right? And so like. All that stuff, just I think for me, like seeing that it was possible for him to do that, like it wasn't just like I don't think he's a bad guy or anything. Like, and we never know about these team dynamics. So like something that NBA teams obviously are going to dig into and will ultimately have a better feel for than the public will at the end. But that is definitely something that teams are parsing is like what type of leadership qualities does he have? How does he deal with adversity? And teams are going to want to interview him and ask him about it. And, get a better sense for themselves, like from him directly.
No, absolutely. I'm glad I asked. And you were able to see some of that in person. Right now, make sure you stay with us because when we come back from this break, Jeremy will help us dive into the rest of the first round and even some mid-second round targets for the Pistons.
I'm Alyssa Robinson for the Detroit Free Press. When you wake up every morning, what's the first thing you do? Check your email? Me too. And when you sign up for our daily briefing newsletter, you'll get all the latest news sent directly to your inbox so you can wake up and be ready for the day. We also have newsletters about COVID-19 in Michigan, the latest entertainment headlines, as well as Woodward 248, a newsletter specifically for people living and working in Southeast Oakland County. And don't forget about automotive headlines and all the latest news from our Michigan sports teams. We have a newsletter for every personality and preference. Just head to freep.com/newsletters to sign up for any one of these great options and more.
We're back here with Jeremy Wu from Sports Illustrated, and we talked about the top four in the first segment. Now we're going to get into the latter part of the lottery and some of the second round. So of those non-top 4 or 5 guys, Jeremy, who kind of sticks out as being toward the top of that pack to you?
Please don't say Keegan Murray.
Say Keegan Murray.
Keegan Murray.
There we go.
So I think it's going to be like 5 is going to be a tricky spot to be, whoever ends up picking there, just because I think that is kind of like, and again, I don't think it's crazy that like a Chet could fall to like 5 or 6, honestly. Like I do think there's scenarios where that might happen. I don't know if it's likely, but it's not like totally out of the question. But I think like Keegan, Shaden Sharp, Johnny Davis will probably be in those conversations. I think probably some teams with Matherin will probably be in that conversation. I really like Dyson Daniels. I don't know if he'll go that high, but I think he is in that group for me. And then I think, some people, I think like AJ Griffin and Jalen Duren have sort of been talked about as like guys who could go high. I ultimately don't think they will. I think those guys will fall a little bit further just because of the questions there. So I personally, just when I'm looking at this right now, I don't view those guys as like strongly in the mix at like 5, 6, 7. But again, there's a lot left to play out.
For Pistons fans who are like, why do we need to worry about these guys? Just remember the Pistons can fall all the way to 7 with where they're slotted. And there's been a lot of conversation about Troy Weaver trying to acquire a second lottery pick. So if you're listening to this and like, oh, we already heard the guys we need to hear about, like these are the guys that we're about to talk about right now with Jeremy, could play factors in the Pistons draft. I want to ask about Shaden Sharp. I am like just mesmerized by this guy. It's such a mystery, and I think that's probably why. But what is going on? Do you think he's going to stay in the draft? The report was they think he's going to declare. He hasn't actually declared, right?
I honestly would have to check. I haven't looked this week. I'm assuming he's going to test. Like I'm pretty sure he's going to test. My ultimate position is I don't know exactly what's going on behind the scenes, but if his stock you're going to be a top 5, 6 pick, you got to go because that money is there. And I think Kentucky is probably prepared to lose him if he starts to do that. So teams are obviously looking at him pretty hard. I went back and I've been watching I saw him play at Peach Jam last summer, and I went back and I've been watching some of those games again just to try to like refresh myself. And yeah, I mean, he is really interesting. And I think he's a really smooth athlete. The game kind of comes easily to him. When he's playing really, really well, it's really impressive to watch. He kind of glides. Like he's one of those guys who it's very, very light in his feet, good balance, and then uses that to sort of set up his jumper, which is streaky, but like he should be a good shooter in the end, right? So he's probably a straight 2 guard, like doesn't really have point guard tendencies, isn't really a playmaker for teammates yet, or at least I haven't. But if we're just talking about upside, the athleticism and sort of like the ease with which he kind of creates space with the ball, I think probably puts him, if like gun to my head, if I'm just like who has the most upside, I would put him like a little bit ahead of Johnny Davis or Matherin, just because he's a year younger than those guys, and just the very easy to see like stuff is there with him. Now the flip side is obviously he, didn't play basketball this year, so we don't really know exactly. Like I've heard that he was really good, in practice for Kentucky. He definitely was their best prospect. There's no question about that. But teams are going to have to get him in workouts and feel comfortable saying, we have a sense of what we're going to get from him. Because there were games where he wasn't always playing super hard. Defensively, he takes plays off, like some habits that, again, he's far from the first teenager to ever have those habits. But, you got to look at that stuff.
Keegan Murray is a guy that I think the Pistons are pretty high on. And if they're in that 4 or 5 range, I think he would definitely be someone who's strongly considered. Of course, he was extremely productive in college. There's no doubt he could play. I think he's just the classic, this guy's good, but he's old, right? Well, for draft terms, he's like 21 years old. For you, how much does that factor in, and how do you view him as an NBA player as far as ceiling?
Yeah, the age thing is interesting. I think, if it's a situation where it's like it's really close between this guy and the other guy, you probably take the younger guy. But I think it's all really relative because like player development is a very like nonlinear thing. Guys take weird leaps sometimes, and he, definitely fits that bill. Like, I liked him a lot at Iowa as a freshman. And I thought he was their best prospect, but they didn't play him a lot. Probably didn't play him enough. And they had Garza, right? So Garza was the focal point of the offense. So it's just interesting because, a year ago we were looking at him as like, hey, this is a really interesting defensive prospect. We're not sure how good he's going to be offensively, right? And then he comes in and averages whatever he averaged, like 25. What did he average? I don't know, 24, 25 points a game in the Big Ten. So that's like not a joke, right? And so you go see him and it's, the athleticism is there. He's quick off the floor. He's just very steady. He's an NBA player. And so it's just some, if you need that position and you are a team that like wants to, pick someone who can play early, I think, you can argue for him as high as, 4 or 5, 6.
So I want to transition into a guy you mentioned earlier, and that's Adrian Griffin Jr. at Duke. And I don't know what to think about this guy, Jeremy, because everybody tells me he's really, really good and he should be number 5 and he's a super athlete. And I didn't see the athleticism, and I know there's an injury history. I buy the shooting. Like he's probably one of the top 3 shooters in the class. So I get that, but I didn't see any of the other stuff. Like I see him more at like pushing back to number 10 than to number 5. Am I missing something?
No, I feel kind of the same way with him. I don't think that's like off base at all. Like I think, there was debate about whether he was the second best Duke prospect or if it was Mark Williams or what, around the NBA. And I think I've gotten a little bit more comfortable with the idea of Griffin as a project just because, again, like he does shoot it well. His body, some people think he's a little bit too like over muscled, but he is, he's strong and, he's much younger. I think he's an August birthday, so he hasn't turned 19 yet. So those are all things that bode well. And, it's easy to kind of make this point for a lot of players where, with COVID, guys miss time, hasn't been enough game time. He definitely was like playing catch up when he got to Duke. And also he missed a lot of time in high school, with, the various injuries that he had. Then he was injured again early in the season at Duke. So, that's a factor that makes it a little bit harder to assess, like you said, sort of like where a guy really is in terms of mobility and stuff. But like, for me, it kind of goes back to like, I think he probably gets a little bit too much credit for his high school career in which he didn't play all that much. And, he was a kid who was ranked very high early and then missed a lot of time and then never really like moved that far down. And then COVID happened. So like, I don't know how much we really should care about. And this is not to hate on the people who do the rankings, but just like, I don't know how much we could really treat those as like useful. Sometimes it's particularly given, what happened in the last few years. So, I do think he'll shoot it. For me, it's more a matter of like, how much does it matter? Because he stops the ball a little bit. He doesn't really like make plays for teammates. If I were confident that he was like a superstar, then it'd be awesome that he can do all that stuff. But I'm not sure if he's that. So then it's like, how much does the ability to kind of create and make tough shots matter? And it's his value sort of hinged on that a lot at Duke, right? So I don't view him as like an instant impact player at all, but he's a guy who might give you stuff in 2 or 3 years, could be a real piece for somebody. If he kind of adds stuff and kind of gets back to that. But I agree with you. Like, I don't view him as like some super athlete. Like, even if, he has been banged up, like, he'll get a little bit stronger for sure. But you can kind of really only go off what you see sometimes in terms of explosiveness, right? Like, it's nice. Maybe it's nice if a guy was explosive when he was 15, but that was, 3 or 4 years ago. So it is what it is, right? It's tough. It's one of the tough things about scouting, especially with young players.
I have one more question on this, and then we can shift to some of the second round guys. But Pistons have the 5th pick. Jabari, Chet, Paolo, and Ivy are off of the board. Just from a fit and upside standpoint, at 5 for the Pistons, who do you pick, Jeremy?
I think Sharp would be interesting there.
Yes.
I just think the shooting ability is good, and I think it helps if you're Detroit and that you're going to have Cade to kind of figure out, get him the ball and make him look better, because Cade does that, right? It's just one of the things he's great at. And so I would have a little bit more confidence taking a shot in that situation. If I'm picking 5th, just knowing that, Detroit definitely does need scoring. I think if they're going to keep Bagley, like he and Murray are kind of like analogous in some ways in terms of role. So I don't necessarily think if you view Bagley as like a piece that's worth, figuring out, then I don't know if Keegan makes sense. And then, I like Johnny Davis a lot, but I think, his style of play is also a little bit more like on the ball. He's not as good of a shooter as Sharp. And as much as I really like Johnny Davis, like I think that's probably what I do in that situation for Detroit.
Yeah, so let's transition to some second round prospects, something we haven't talked at all about on the Pistons Pulse. and the Pistons have pick number 46 in the second round. So I know this is always up in the air. I know some guys end up wanting to be undrafted free agents and not even get picked in the second round. I've heard that happened to Detroit last year with a couple guys. But who are some guys just in that range that maybe would excite you, that you think maybe fall into the second round because they're being undervalued?
Yeah, some of the guys who are possible more likely second rounders than first, I'd say. Like, I don't know if 46 is, like you said, it's tough. But so some of the second rounders I like. I like Keon Ellis from Alabama a lot. I think he kind of got overlooked, and I think the struggles their team had probably didn't help him. But he's just like a tough role player wing who the main thing is he's super skinny, but he's strong and physical for a skinny guy, and he can shoot and he makes plays defensively and he can pass. And I just like guys like that. Like I think guys who know exactly who they are. We've seen it. This year, some of the rookies who have had the most success. I mean, you can look at like New Orleans, like Herb Jones and Alvarado. Alvarado, a guy who I really liked last year. Those guys know exactly who they are and they buy in and they do it. And I think, Keon probably, I don't know if he's as good as those two guys, but kind of has that similar type of role player mentality where you don't have to like worry about teaching a guy what he needs to do, right? So I think he'd be interesting there. Alondes Williams is interesting. I don't know exactly what he's going to have with him. Like his range is probably 25 to 50, but which is super wide. But he can really pass and has shown some interesting stuff. And I think teams are kind of on the scent there. There's a lot of different like interesting kind of like forwards and wings in that range.
What do you think about David Roddy? I always have to ask guys about David Roddy at Colorado State because he's just such, again, maybe I'm intrigued by these like interesting prospects, but it's like, do you think he's going to play in the league?
Yeah, I love David Roddy.
Okay.
I don't think he'll be there at 46 because if he is, he'll probably go back to school.
Okay.
Yeah, I saw Colorado State play a couple times, and I went out there to see him, and then I saw them in the tournament again. And I just think he kind of, again, we talk about like positionless basketball and like that kind of being a thing. Like he can do that. Like he can shoot it a lot better than people thought. He handles it really well. I know he's sort of a bigger bodied guy, but I actually think that might play to his advantage in some respects. Like, physically, at least he's strong and he's long and he's a former football player. So he's, physical and has that mentality. And I think, he's probably gonna have to be like a 3 or a 4 and it's going to matter who you play him with. But I do think that he's an NBA player and that one way or the other, that'll kind of eventually, I don't know how long it's going to take him. I would consider him in the late first, early second.
Overall, you've done draft work for a long time, Jeremy. You're pretty familiar with what the Pistons have done just since they've been in that sort of lottery team role for a little bit. Just what do you think of their trajectory and kind of, and like what do you make of their season? Cade, obviously he was pretty good, but you have guys like Isaiah Stewart and Sadiq Bey that I think are probably starting to show that they may be a little bit better than where they went back in 2020. Sort of what do you make of this group overall?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'd be lying if I said I watched like a ton of Pistons games this year because I have time to watch some NBA, but not a lot because I'm more focused on college during the season. But yeah, I think Cade is what people think he is, which is a great place to be for their roster. I had him one. Mobley also is really good. In the middle of the year, people were like, "Oh, should it be Mobley?" And now I think Detroit should feel. Or they probably always did, but yeah, I think you could feel pretty good about you got the right guy. And like we talked about before, I just think his ability to make guys better and fit with other players, being his size and skill where he can kind of like toggle between positions defensively too. That just gives you so much flexibility. And I think, having him and then, obviously like Sadiq, I think has been a successful development case so far. Like he's been kind of overstretched offensively, but at least he's doing it, right? Like I think he's tapping into probably, scoring ability that people didn't think he had. Maybe he didn't know that he had either. So like, I think that's probably been positive. I like Isaiah Stewart. He's kind of going to be what he's going to be, but he's reliable and guys love him. So, they're going to have to keep adding, obviously. And I'm interested to see if they can get more out of Bagley. Like, I honestly would be willing to give him another shot and just like extend him and see, depending on how much that's going to cost. I don't know. But obviously, they probably need 1 or 2 more good drafts. Like obviously Killian Hayes, like we're not sure what he's going to be. He might be a backup. He might be a third guard. I don't know. I would love to see him kind of put it together. But also, obviously with Cade being on the ball now, it may not happen for him in Detroit. So I think what they do with him will be interesting. But yeah, I think for them, it's just right now, try to get another piece this year. Hopefully they pick in the top 3 and then, keep adding to that and, probably take on salary and picks and kind of do that. But again, like having Cade in place is kind of like the first step that sometimes people will start the rebuild without having that. And so at least, having that in place now is definitely an advantageous position to be in.
Man, Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us. Jeremy Woo, Sports Illustrated, NBA draft analyst. We know you're busy. We're going to let you go here, but thank you so much for joining Amari and I.
Yeah, no problem. This was a lot of fun. Thank you, guys.
Make sure you come back with us after this short break, as Amari and I will now hand out our 2021-2022 Detroit Pistons season awards.
All right. Hey, Carlos, just a quick idea. How about if I say, hey, this is Sean Windsor, and you say, hey, this is Carlos Morales, and I'll go, and then we'll go back. You want to try that?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. You ready?
Yep.
Hey, this is Sean Windsor.
And this is Carlos Benares.
And we are the team behind Free Press Sports with Carlos and Sean, where we are going to talk about, you guessed it, sports, but lots of other stuff. Like what, Carlos?
Oh, we're going to talk about your favorite subject, Sean, food. Probably more food. Arts, culture, sports, TV, movies, you name it. If it's happened in Detroit, we're going to talk about it.
And sometimes we're going to have guests in who obviously know a lot more than we do about just about everything. But we're going to have some Free Press journalists to talk about big stories, folks from the sports world. We're going to be out every Thursday. You can find this podcast wherever you find your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts. We hope you'll join us.
We are back with our third segment of the Pistons Post, and me and Bryce have a pretty fun idea for this one. We're going to do our Pistons season awards, and we have 8 or 9 categories here. A few of them are a little bit more off the wall, so it should be fun. But first, we did get an email last week, and I'm going to hand this over to Bryce because Mike C. sent the email to Bryce, did not send it to me, but did also say he was a free subscriber, so it's all forgiven. Mike, go ahead and break us in, Bryce.
Hey, it's all right if I get a little bit of love. Amari and Wes always getting all the love. So Mike C. emailed us, said, really enjoyed the podcast this week and the DA interview. Good to hear a national perspective on the Pistons. I know some people didn't like that national perspective. That's all right. That's why we bring those guests on. He says, I'm a regular listener. Thank you. Plus a free subscriber. Thank you again. And supporter that wants it to continue. Please let your bosses, advertisers know. Mike C., we did pass that along to Anjanette and Kirk and Carrie and everybody at Freep that helps make the Pistons Pulse happen. And we let them know that we have at least one person, and we know we have more supporters than that. So again, we always encourage you guys, reach out, leave a rating, leave a comment, email us, hit us up on a Twitter DM, whatever you use social media wise. We love to hear it. We love to interact. Omari, let's get this going. We're going to start a little bit more like legit awards. Let's start with the most, we're not even going to do MVP, guys, because we all know who the MVP is. It's Cade Cunningham. We don't need to do that. Who was the most improved Piston for you this season?
I'm going to go, and there's a few guys I think that could fit this category. I'm going to go with Sadiq Bey just because he very easily could have been slotted in as a permanent 3-and-D guy. But for him, I mean, really the second half of the season especially, I think he averaged something on the lines of 17, 6, and 3. He made strides as a passer this season, just makes really smart passes. For him the strides he made, scoring inside the arc, like a little bit of a turnaround jumper going, taking guys off the dribble. He's stronger than most guys who are defending him, so he can kind of bump guys out the way a little bit. We saw bits and pieces of it for him as a rookie, but it wasn't really a role he was comfortable in. And as the season went on, he got much more comfortable in that role. And that's a hard leap to make. Most guys don't go from taking 2/3 of their shots from 3 to operating inside the paint and just inside the arc in general more. And he really got to the point where he was doing that well. So I think there's a few guys you can make an argument for, but for me, it's pretty cut and dry, Sadiq Bey.
Yeah, I actually had him number 1 on my list for a lot of the same reasons. And, I feel like a lot of people were not happy that Sadiq Bey tried to improve his all-around game in the offseason. There was a lot of people through those first 20, 25 games where he was struggling to make shots that were saying Sadiq should have just stayed in his lane. He should have perfected his three-point shot. He doesn't need to do this. And then all of a sudden, he blew up, as we all know, throughout the rest of the season. I'm going to throw this one out here, and I don't know if it counts or not, but how about Marvin Bagley III, man? He really came around compared to what he was getting in Sacramento. And I know it was a change of scenery was a big part of that. But shout out Marvin Bagley III for how much he improved throughout the season.
I agree. I think Marvin is just the fact that he played 18 games, that it's just the games played disqualification. But yeah, he came in, immediately found his groove, really gave the Pistons a needed element, just being an athletic power forward / center. He shot like 55%, something along the lines of that, which was like a career high. Would have been a career high if he played more games. He came in, he found his role immediately. He really gelled with the offense, and he also said that this season was the most fun he had playing basketball after he arrived in Detroit, which is a pretty big compliment, given that he had a pretty good Duke team. So, I think Marvin would be on the ballot, no doubt.
So here's where I tried to really get interesting with this. What about Jeremy Grant? I feel like Jeremy Grant improved throughout the season in the sense of he came into the year with this number one scoring option role, et cetera, from the year before. And then post All-Star break, I think even the Jeremy Grant people who wanted him traded would admit he fell back into like number 2, number 3. I wanted to give him some love for that.
For sure. Like he came back and he played off of Cade Cunningham, whereas it felt like earlier in the season. And out of fairness to them, they didn't really play a whole lot together because Cade missed some time at the beginning, and then Jeremy got hurt in December, so they probably only played, I just looked it up last week, he probably only played 13.
What day last week was that? What day? You remember what day?
You know I don't know which day next. You know I know which day. I don't know what day today is. But he did come back, and he played off of Cade a little bit more, which is how it should be. Like Cade's the guy with the ball in his hands. Like your primary playmaker should be the guy making life easier for Jeremy Grant and not the other way around. And Jeremy's efficiency, like before All-Star and after All-Star, it's just like night and day. He went from shooting like 40% and 30% from 3 to like 46% overall and like 41% from 3. And we'll talk about this on future pods, but I think that's kind of what adds a wrinkle to Jeremy's offseason is that he did come back and he did find his stride with Cade and with Sadiq, and they were playing winning basketball together. And for the Pistons, it's, just how much do we want to pay for that, basically, because he is eligible for that extension.
That's a big caveat.
Absolutely. And we're going to move on to Defensive Player of the Year. Bryce, who would your DPOY be?
So I gave a perimeter player a lot of consideration for this, but I'm fully on board the Isaiah Stewart bandwagon and what he does defensively, Omari. Like his switchability, I'm just going to say, I think it's darn near elite. I don't know. I'm about to watch all these playoffs. I'm going to get to watch a lot of the regular NBA games now, or like other NBA games. We talked about this before the episode. I try to stay in my lane, because I watch the Pistons all the time. So I don't have a lot of comparisons, but I think he's just so good switching on defense.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's cut and dry. Isaiah Stewart and, Killian's probably second on my ballot because he is a great perimeter defender in his own right. But yeah, just Isaiah with his rim protection numbers were good, but also late this season, he switched on to James Harden and Luka. And you're not going to stop those guys, but bothering them to the point to where they're definitely do I want to keep driving against this guy? And that is extremely valuable. And I believe I've said this before, and if I haven't, I'll say it now. I think Isaiah's game is going, because fans debate, was he a starter? Is he a bench player? He might be both, but I promise you when the Pistons are in the playoff, he's playing 38 minutes a game because that skill set is just so valuable and teams tend to go small anyway. But just the way he's able to switch, that's exactly what you want your undersized big to be able to do, is to be able to keep up with perimeter players, because otherwise there's no real advantage to having one. And the fact that Isaiah is already pretty good at it, this is his second season. He also knocked out 11 of 18 threes, and that has nothing to do with Defensive Player of the Year. But you just got to see the outlines of him being a guy that is just the perfect small ball center. And yeah, just to see him defensively, this is a no-brainer to me. He's the DPOY.
Yeah, I agree. And here's the thing. He may end up being a big off the bench during the regular season. And then, like you say, you get into watch the playoffs. And again, I'm going to really dig into the playoffs this year. There's going to be some guys that were in regular season rotations for these teams that don't play in the playoffs for what you're talking about, Amari, is that they just get played off the floor because they have especially ball screen coverage bigs. You got to have something you're really, really good at in ball screen coverage. And I think the easiest thing is going to be switching. So, and if the three-point shot comes along enough that he can keep the floor spread, that's really, really valuable in season, of course, but especially in the postseason. Talking about coming off the bench, this one was really hard for me. I didn't know where to go with this one, but who do you have as Sixth Man of the Year?
This is a hard one, and I think this one more than any other award, maybe you could really make an argument for multiple guys, partially because Detroit's rotation was a bit in the flex all year just with the injuries and whatnot. But they also had a lot of guys that I just thought were really good bench players, maybe a little over leveraged in the starting lineup, but you move them to the bench and they really give you a lot. And this is hard. And if this were a more formal awards thing, I would get into the games played, qualifiers, and all that. But I'm not. We're just kind of doing this on the fly.
It's our podcast. We'll do it how we want.
And I'm just going to go ahead and give it to Killian, just because I think he found his groove once he moved to the bench. And to be sixth man of the year, I think there has to be evidence that you're actually better as a sixth man and not just like an overqualified bench player. And Killian did begin to find his groove coming off the bench. We talked about him a little bit earlier about his defense, but he's Detroit's best perimeter defender from the guard position. Like you could argue he's their best overall passer, and the only other guy that has an argument against that is Cade, really. But Killian could just make, I think, reads that no other player on the roster can make. He really began to find his confidence as a scorer as the season went on. And he also closed a lot of games for the Pistons, and I think a sixth man should be a guy you want in games at the end of them, just because it just shows how valuable they are. And yeah, Killian and Cade are not starting games together, but they were finishing a lot of games, and they finished, some pretty good wins as well. The other guy that I would probably vote for Killian is Hami, who really had some big games, and he missed like the last 10 games or whatever with the finger injury, but up until that point was having a pretty good season. But I feel like this might be a debate for some reason. I feel like Killian is just a little bit better than Hami overall as a player.
Ooh.
And that's kind of the deciding factor for me.
Well, I was getting ready to be like, yeah, I thought about Killian, but Hami was mine. But now you have like my mind racing here. You can't be throwing out stuff that's not in the outline, Omari, man. I gotta prep. That is a really good question. I think Killian, right? If you had to choose between one of those guys to stay on the roster, it's Killian, right? Hami's the better player right now.
It's like, Hami is elite at one thing, and that's pressure in the rim. Like, he's a great athlete. He's going to he pressures the rim. Like, he's a great athlete. So he's a lob threat. Like, he gives you a lot of energy. And I think in a bench role, just being that energy guy is really important. And it just comes down to what you value more. Like, if you like that about Hami, then you can make that argument, and like that's completely fine. Like, Hami's really great in that role. And Hami's game is also just like so translatable. Like, you play him next to anybody, you know what he's going to do. Like he has bad games here and there, but for the most part, you know exactly what you're going to get. And Killian could be a little bit more seesawy, I think, at times. But Killian is like just the passing and the defense. And then when you start to get to the rim a little bit more toward the end, I just think if you're picking a player, you probably pick Killian, not just from the upside standpoint, but just the defense and the passing to me are probably harder skills to find. Whereas Hami's energy and pressure in the rim, like that's really important, but you could probably live without it.
Yeah, and I think if you're taking the Killian we saw, the last 2-3 weeks of the season, then it's definitely Killian, because that was just a different version of him than what we had really seen at maybe at any point, at least for a consistent stretch.
And there's probably some recency bias here too.
Yes,
like, to be fair to Hami, there's some recency bias here as well.
He hasn't played for a while, so we're forgetting a lot. Like when he dropped all those games in December or January or whatever, and I know that was during the real bad COVID time. I understand it, but like there's some real upside with him. I think the defense is definitely a question with Hami. I would take Killian. I think I feel pretty comfortable with that, but it would be an interesting debate. And we're going to ask all of our listeners, reach out to us. We always love the engagement, but if you have a steadfast thought on this one or any of the awards, make sure you let us know what you think. But let's go to the next one, which is a little bit more fun here. So we're going to get into some of the fun ones. And this isn't best fit. I just learned this lingo from you beat writers throughout the season. Not best fit in terms of on the court, but best fit off the court. You see this a lot more than anybody, Omari. What Detroit Piston has the best fit? Yeah,
the best dressed Piston. So there's a few guys who could fit this category. I feel like there's probably like a really obvious answer here that I am not.
It's not Jeremy. It's not Jeremy Grant, in my opinion. Now I don't know.
It's not Jeremy Grant. Okay.
I don't know anything about fit or style or what's in and out and all that other stuff. But
it's just not Jeremy.
some of the pictures I've seen, I'm like, that can't be it. Like that. I don't know what it is, but that's not.
Well, that's funny. I was going to pick Jeremy. I think Jeremy.
This is where Omari calls me uncultured.
The thing about NBA fashion is it can skew like very wacky. Like you have guys that wear some stuff, and it's just like I feel like you're just doing this,
Russ.
To go viral. Yeah, like you're wearing it to go viral on social media. Like some of the stuff Kuz wears, I'm like, there's like, come on, you wouldn't wear that if it were for the cameras, I'm gonna go with Jeremy because like he wears like a lot of t-shirts and put like a jacket and stuff over it. Like he's always got like like nice pants, like just very like it is like I don't want to say it's like grungy, but it's just very like I guess I would say approachable. Like it's stuff that I can see myself wearing, and that's my own personal bias. I'm like, he wears stuff that, like, if I was an NBA player, I feel like I'd probably dress along the lines of that. But you can make an argument for Killian. Killian's had some nice fits this year. Like it's a few guys. Like I think Frank is up there. Yeah, like this is probably the one that's most wide open, but I'm going with Jeremy. And it's funny that you said it's not Jeremy at all. Like we're complete opposites on that.
Yeah, probably because I would never wear anything that Jeremy Grant wears, but I'm also, like I say, like pretty boring, and I just wear jeans and a nice polo is my fit. But I picked Frank Jackson because I loved what Frank Jackson decided to do with his longer shorts at the end of the season during games. So Wes shakes his head, and I love that this makes Wes so mad. Let's get to the next one because I'm excited about this next one, partly because it was my idea, and I'm a huge fan of this show, but Survivor. So I don't know if everybody's seen the TV show Survivor, but essentially you send all these people out into the wilderness and they vote each other off and you have to live in the environments, all that stuff. Who on the Detroit Pistons would win the game of Survivor?
I'm going to cheat on this one. It's a tie between Sadiq Bey
No.
and Isaiah Stewart.
No. You don't even let people tie on Rookie of the Year voting. You have to pick somebody. There are no ties in the game of Survivor.
It's true, there are no ties in the game of Survivor. I gotta go with Isaiah Stewart. Like the man, for one, I guess between him and Sadiq, because like they're just the two biggest dudes on the team. Like, it looks like they eat rocks for breakfast and whatnot, or Dells for breakfast, whatever the saying is. Yeah, I don't know. They're clearly top two. I'll probably just go with Isaiah because I think Isaiah has a slightly higher level of, I don't want to say competitiveness, but just like I just feel like Isaiah would be the one to come out of that. Like I think Isaiah might be willing to do some things Sadiq may not be willing to do to win. And that's what it comes down to for me.
All right. So I was going to say Isaiah, but what I've learned about watching Survivor, it's not always about I think Isaiah would get a little hot-headed and that'd get him voted off the island and all that stuff. So I went with our guy, Cade Cunningham. Like Cade Cunningham is the most strategic, like mature. He's going to say all the right things. He's going to do whatever it takes. He's malleable to, his personality. So I went with Cade Cunningham. And plus, we had to give Cade Cunningham some sort of love as we went throughout these rewards. So Cade Cunningham wins Survivor. What would be fun is you just put the entire Pistons roster out there against each other and see who wins. But I think Cade would have the likeliest chance if you dumped one of them into a game.
I like Cade. Cade is not the wrong answer for anything. So, I'm not saying that's a cop-out answer. I'm just saying you can't ever go wrong saying Cade unless it's for like 6-man or whatever. Next question we have is future changer, guy who changed what we expect of him long-term the most. And I'll go ahead and let you go first on that one, Bryce.
I'm going to say Killian Hayes because I think throughout the season, he kind of changed what everybody, like starting point guard, all these things. And then he took this second unit role. Another one, like if I'm trying to get like my own personal, was Kelly Olynyk. Like I had super high expectations for Kelly Olynyk and what he would contribute to this team. And I don't know what it was. We saw some ups and downs from him, but it wasn't what I thought it was going to be when the Pistons signed him. So those two guys, and then even Isaiah Livers, I'm really excited. I'm pretty high on Isaiah Livers. So the fact that there's a chance he may be like a contributor off the bench, that I think his future of what I thought he had with the Pistons changed just based off of that.
I like the Livers pick just for him to come in with the injury, and he kind of finds his groove towards the end. And I think he definitely looks like an NBA player. I'm going to go Sadiq again for this one, just because you kind of mentioned Summer League. He was doing a Kobe impersonation and didn't do it extremely well, but you could see what he was trying to do, and for him to eventually figure it out over the course of the season. I would say I thought it was a good idea for him to kind of try to take that role on at least, because it's a rebuilding season. You have nothing to lose.
100%.
And I was really confused that people were like, "Oh, Sadiq shouldn't be doing that." I'm like, "What do you mean? Like they're in a rebuild. You should be seeing if he can do this."
This was the year to do it, Amari. Like
this is the year to do it. Like if he thinks he could do it, the coach staff thinks he could do it, they give him the green light. Like what's the downside here? Sometimes I think people just complain just because they feel like it's their job too. Like it was like when I saw people complaining that he's taking these shots in Summer League of all things, I'm like, I just got to mute some of y'all because this is the silliest complaint I've seen this week. But I think for Sadiq to actually thrive in that role kind of changed my long-term view of him the most, because just because a guy thinks he can do it or has a green light to do it doesn't mean he can do it. Like we've seen guys take on bigger roles and they're just not quite that guy. And it's not their fault. I mean, Sadiq is the 19th pick. If he's a good 3-and-D guy, that's a great pick. But now we're talking about him in different terms of, is he
Not Klay Thompson terms. Not Klay Thompson.
Not Klay Thompson terms, but like Chris Middleton terms. Like, can this guy be the third offensive option on the championship team? And to me, that was a very different conversation that we were having about Sadiq this time last year. Killian would be in that group as well. But I think Killian, for him, was more so doing things we already thought he can do, more so than doing things we hadn't seen him do previously.
Yeah, so I definitely want to get to a couple more of these. So we're going to keep moving along here. Role player of the year.
Role player of the year. So I actually will give this one Hami, just because I think he came in and he arrived at the trade deadline last year, and he was pretty good to close the season. But for him to just really embrace that role of bringing energy off the bench, he was the only guy that could catch a lob for like 2/3 of the season. Just the energy plays and all that. For me, like, I think it's Hami for sure. Like, Hami's exactly what you want in like a role guy.
Yeah, so I have fan favorite Luka Garza as role player of the year. And here's why. Like, I'm making light of this a little bit, but in all seriousness, who was the guy on the bench that's always cheering and clapping? I don't think Wes likes my answer. Always cheering and clapping and, excited and doing all. I love that stuff. So he was always doing that. When he got his chance to play, at the very least, he played his butt off, right? Like, it wasn't always pretty. The defense is questionable, but he played his butt off. And then he went down and played in the G League as well with the Motor City Cruise. Again, I'm having a little bit of fun here, but I truly believe, I think people think that that's just like super easy to do. And I don't know. Yes, this is their job. Yes, they're professionals. They're getting paid. I understand all of that. But he was also the National Player of the Year at Iowa. Jeremy just talked about how the whole Iowa offense ran through him 12 months ago. And now he's coming in and having to do like the dirty work and be the good teammate and all those things. Like, I did want to give him some love.
I like that answer because I would not have thought of that. But if you're talking about just a guy embracing his role to the best that he can, like, it is Luka. Like, like, he was the man in college basketball last year. And he comes in, he was extremely humble. Since day one, he's talked very openly about, like, I know I need to get better at defense. I know I'm slow-footed. I know I'm not the best athlete. I know I have to work hard at those things to last in the NBA. And just the energy he brought from the bench, the energy he brought when he came into games, understanding that he's going to be outmatched in some ways, but he can still come in and play his role to the best of his ability. Like, that's hard to do. Like, Hami had a really good quote during the season. I don't want to get too sidetracked, but he said, everybody who's ever played an NBA game at some point were the best. Like, it could have been middle school, it could have been high school. For most of you guys, high school, right? For a lot of these guys, it was college. But all these guys at some point have known what it's like to be the best. And in the NBA, you're not. And some guys can adapt and some guys can't. And Luka adapted to that. He was no longer the best. He understood that. He's a G League player. He's, at the end of the bench. He's not getting in unless Isaiah's in foul trouble and Kelly's hurt, right? So I like that answer a lot. That makes me want to change my answer from Hami, but I'm not.
No, that's me. No, let's stay down this. I like this a lot because I only want to get to one more of the questions for sure. But I lived that, Omari, with my playing career. So I went to a very small school, as I've outlined. I was the best player in the area. I always had the ball I was a 6'5", 6'6" point guard. I always had the ball in my hands, all those things. But there was a lot of kids like me from my area that were just put up the same numbers, tried to go JUCO and didn't make it because they couldn't adjust from going at the big fish in the little pond to the little fish in the big pond. And like, for whatever reason, I was able to do that. I was able to adjust my game. I was able to adjust my mentality. And I realized that's a completely different level of what we're saying, but it's the same idea. It's not easy to do. I struggled with it at times, but that's a lot of credit to the guys that have been able to figure that out.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, you become accustomed to just being treated a certain way, being able to do a certain thing. And it's humbling. Like, when you've been the best, sometimes you lose the thirst to try to be the best again. You just kind of want what you had previously. And that's tough. Like, that really is tough. And for Luka to go from National College Player of the Year to into the second round pick, and you're playing in the G League, but you're still bringing out energy and you're a fan favorite, says a lot about him for sure. And he's been one of the most enjoyable players to talk to this year just because of how forthcoming he was about that. So, before Hami said that, I don't think I ever really thought about it in those terms, but it does make a lot of sense. And you have a lot of guys who that just decides their NBA ceiling. Are you going to embrace doing the dirty work until the rest of your game comes along, or are you just going to be upset, that things aren't easy anymore and you're just going to flame out? Like, it's like all that stuff goes into it for sure.
And are you going to be content? Like talking about draft prospects, I think about this a lot. You don't know how they're going to react once they get drafted. Again, different level, but my goal my whole life was to play Division I basketball. I was going to be the first kid or the second kid from my high school to ever play Division I basketball. And one of my biggest regrets, and I don't have a lot from my playing days, was when I first got to American, I settled. And it wasn't like I made it in like this big sense, but it's like I accomplished my goal. Not like, idiot, like go find another goal, like keep, whatever. Like I was a grinder day in and day out, but it was like I lost a little bit of that because that was my goal. And it took me a few months to like regroup and like, no, now you be really good here also. I know we've gotten a little sidetracked, but I think that stuff was really good. One final one here, Amari, that I do want to ask, and I want to actually change this a little bit. I want your personal moment of the year covering the Detroit Pistons. I know what mine is. I won't take very long, so you take the floor, take how much every time you need to answer. But what is your personal moment of the year? Or you want me to go ahead and drop mine so you can think about it for a second?
Yeah, I got to think about it for a second.
Okay, I knew I dropped this on you. Mine has to be the trip to Detroit. And I know I've talked about it, so I don't want to go through it all again. That was amazing. I got to meet Wes in person. I got to meet you in person again. I know we had met in person, but like I got to legit spend time with you, Amari. We got to go out and eat. You met my wife. My wife got to see this world that like she doesn't really feel like she's a part of this podcast, content creation stuff, but she got to see all that. LCA, meeting Rod and Lauren, and I didn't get to meet James, but Johnny Kane, etc. That was incredible. By far, no question. I wish the Pistons would have won, but the highlight of my season was that trip and getting to do that, and we are definitely going to do it again.
Absolutely. Yeah,
or Freef can just give me a full-time job, and we'll just move to Detroit.
Hint, hint, wink, wink. Kirk and Anjanette, as they listen to this pod after we finish recording. You know what? I think my favorite moment of the season, and there are a few that could fit this, but I think there's a couple that stand out. I would go when Cade Cunningham went against Kevin Durant back in November, and it's like, oh, like fans were like, we have a young guy who is going shot for shot with Kevin Durant. Like, yeah, we have the number one pick. Yeah, we know Cade is going to be good. Yeah, this, yeah, that. But I think to actually see that, like folks were like, okay, like this is real. Like this is kind of what we were hoping we would see. And especially since Cade has started the season a little slowly, like I'm sure fans weren't like worrying, but there's still some like, when are we going to begin to see this kind of pay off? So that was one of the first moments that I was like, okay, this is what it's like having a number one pick. I would say the other one was probably the last big win the Pistons got this season when they defeated the Sixers like right at the end of March. And that was a home game. And they like went on like this giant run at the end of the game, like 30-10, something along the lines of that, kind of came from behind. And you had multiple guys step up in effort, like Cade and Sadiq played well. And for most of the game, it looked like a loss until they caught fire. And then they just completely smacked a healthy Phillies team that had Embiid and Harden. And
a motivation to win in that game. They needed to win that game for playoff seeding.
And I just remember the LCA was just like rocking. And it was like late in the fourth quarter. And it's just like everybody's so like exuberant and happy. And it was just like, okay, like I think this is a taste of what next season is going to be like. So I would say those two games are the ones that stick out to where it's like, okay, like you see the fan base really starting to see that this is changing for the better.
Yeah, I agree, man. I'm so excited for the offseason, Amari, and the draft and free agency and all that stuff. But what I'm really excited about is to get into next season where hopefully this team is in those types of games pretty much night in and night out. I hope that's where they're at. But it's going to be fun. Stay with us this offseason. It's going to be a fun offseason, lots of stuff, and it's a great time to be a Pistons fan.
No doubt it is. Thanks everybody again for listening to today's pod. Shout out to Kerry Jr. II, our editor, our executive producer, Anjanette Delgado, and of course, our executive producer, Kirkland Crawford. Shout out to Wes, who I promise we'll get on the pod at some point. Unfortunately, not today. And again, thank you everybody for listening, and we'll check in again soon.